La parole est à vous.
Mr. Tremblay, the floor is yours. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Members today to discuss the 2024-2025 main estimates for Environment and Climate Change Canada. I would provide you with an overview of our mains this year, after which my colleagues and I would be happy to answer all your questions. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that we are on the traditional territory, unceded territory of the Anishinaabe First Nation, Algonquin Anishinaabe First Nation. D'un océan à l'autre, le
From coast to coast, Canada is heating up twice as quickly as the global average. Last year, there were forest fires, and the smoke and repercussions made this the worst year for forest fires. For the first time in the Northwest Territories, an entire capital had to be evacuated. Il y avait 20 000 personnes qui ont été évacuées. 20,000 people were evacuated. Now we have to talk about conservation and other ways to counter climate change.
But allow me to mention a few highlights. In our 24-25 mains estimates, they total $2.8 billion. Does compare with 23-24 by adding $314 million more. Among the differences, I would just mention a few. One is about the creation of the Canada Water Agency. You see reflected in our mains the budget 2020-24 decision to provide $681 million in new funding over 10 years, beginning this year, and $18.9 million ongoing to implement the Freshwater Action Plan and also to establish the Canada Water Agency. Another things you will see, it's the renewed collaboration with the Canadian Climate Institute. Our mains reflect the government's decision to provide $26.7 million over 5 years for new contribution agreements with the Canadian Climate Institute. The objective is for the CCI to expand its works related to adapting and mitigating the effects of climate change. Notre budget a aussi été ajusté avant de...
Our budget was adjusted in order to take in $211 billion, so more than $4 billion for us. That guarantees access to high performance. It allows the department to advance in science and research and for prevention, including to prevent extreme weather events. So, for example, using high-performance computers in order to have a better understanding of what is to come and to alert local populations of changing weather events. There is funding for meteorological departments to the tune of $643.5 million over 10 years. And over $2 million per year to ensure that the Canada's Meteorological Service can continue to alert people to the quality of ice, air, and so on 24/7. More has been put in place with regards to the strategy of adaptation. The budget had allotted for $935 million, and our department got $637 million. Out of that money, $530 million are in the main estimates.
And variations you can see in our budget for this year. More details about those funds can be found in the main estimate documentation. Thank you for listening, and my colleagues and I would be happy now to answer your questions. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Merci, Monsieur Tremblay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Tremblay, and thank you to all of the witnesses for being here. We'll start with Mr. Deltel. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to get started on the right foot. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to your Canadian Parliament, and thank you for serving your country through the important roles that you occupy at ECCC. First, I'd like to echo what Mr. Major said earlier. It's a shame to see that the minister is not here today. Honestly, I did expect him to be here because he was very positive last week that he would be. And I do think it's quite a shame because he was at the question period and he was unable to delay his meeting with the Ministers' Council, even though he has a responsibility towards this committee and towards citizens. I do think that he's the type of man who is always ready to go into battle, but it seems that he has avoided that today, and it's quite a shame. To the deputy minister, I'd like to ask you about the times where the minister was here. One of the first questions I asked him was about a trip abroad. I believe it was for COP27, one of the first trips abroad he took. I asked him what his carbon footprint was. I believe he had gone to Egypt at the time and spent long days, 10 to 14 days, and I wanted to know what his environmental footprint was. And his answer was, we have standards at the government, and the department is taking care of that. Can you contextualize that? And because this seems for a lot of people that this is to be greenwashing. There is a certain amount that we can legally spend. The tons of emissions are calculated, and indeed, we pay the Treasury Board a sum in order to compensate for the use of such travel. So the department pays, not the minister, the department indeed. And this is true for all of the ministers' travels. I have to check, but yes, it's included in the department's budget. The last COP meeting, how much did it cost your department in greenwashing? I don't have the travel numbers, but they were revealed on the costs for COP28. The minister said that it was indeed important to be at COP28, and that was an investment within the context of the international effort that we must take. So $13,000 round trip for a desert in Dubai. I understand that it's important, but it's expensive. I haven't spent my life, trying to get people to get in line with an ecological agenda, but it does look like greenwashing. Of course, it's like you're, justifying this by buying those environmental credits. Well, with regards to the COP, there's an effort that must be made with regards to climate change, and that happens outside of Canada. If we don't participate actively in the COP agreements, then we won't have any power on those decisions. Interesting enough, at COP28, there was a much larger delegation, but the provinces also increased their participation. Alberta and Saskatchewan were very present and participated a lot. It would be a pleasure for me to talk to them if I was in Alberta, but I'm here in Ottawa. I have to ask you, as representative of ECCC, these questions. Can you tell me how many people went and how much was paid to the Treasury Board in order to do some whitewashing, or greenwashing rather, for COP28? What I can say is that the ECCC minister, or department rather, had 44 people attend, which was the same for COP27 and COP28. So with regards to the greenwashing, that was just for the plane round trips. It's not for the hotels and the stay there. Indeed, it's for the carbon deficit and not for the hotels. Mr. Chair, I would like to take advantage of the time that I have and take stock of this of the motion that we've tabled. Due to it being very busy, the Given the large workload the committee has on the docket, the committee instructs the chair to book 5 meetings in between July 8th, 2024 and September 13th, 2024, while the House is adjourned to deal with unfinished business, such as the $8 billion Net Zero Accelerator Fund waste and other pressing matters as they emerge. It is essential for Canadians to see us working hard for them. We know that the summer is not a time for vacation. We are all in our ridings meeting Canadians and making our commitments known. But we also listen to Canadians, but that doesn't mean that we can't be here in Ottawa and do our jobs as policymakers. We've invited the minister for the past 2 months. Maybe he'll find time this summer to join us over these 5 meetings. Indeed, we have a motion here that specifies that there is a slush fund, which is titled the Net Zero Accelerator Fund. And that is something that we want to address. We want to understand that we understand that the carbon tax is having an impact on the population, and the government has concealed some information. Are the kind of things that we wanted to talk to the minister about. Again, on climate change, we see a lot of impact from climate change, and we would like to talk to the minister about it. And just because it's the summer, it doesn't mean that we can't hold any sessions in the Parliament. And then there is the Green Fund. Today, we learned at the question period that the minister had stocks in a company that was directly involved in that scandal, which is pretty major. There are many debates that we can take on, that we must take on, and yes, we can do it during 5 different days here and during this parliamentary committee. We have a pretty long agenda. We have about 100 days ahead of us to take this on. This is not major. We all have the ability to find some time during the summer to convene on these issues. We are all here members who care about taxpayers. Therefore, we must be accountable to them. And it's true for the government and as well as for the opposition. It behooves us to do the difficult work, and we have to ask the government, take them to task vis-a-vis their poor management of public funds. Mr. Major.
And thank you, my colleague, for bringing out these important points. We have a lot of work to do here, and we've done a lot of studies. We've done this water study here for actually, I don't think it's been over 15 meetings, right? Lots of good information. We have a lot of work to clean up from before we head into the fall's issue. Never mind about all the other things we're finding on this committee, such as the $8 billion Net Zero Accelerator Fund that has given no commitment to. Over 70% of the projects have been given no commitment to reduce emissions when the fund was supposed to reduce emissions. And now we're finding out that there's, this carbon tax is going to cost Canadians $30 billion a year, $2,000 per family. It's ridiculous. And we need to be talking about this this is all because of the carbon tax. This is all because this is a government-made problem by our minister that this committee was supposed to report to. The fact that he's not here today spells it out very clearly. So hopefully he will see his wisdom and his errors in his ways, and he will get here this summer when we have these committee meetings. And I don't think anybody really realizes just how serious this is. There is a massive amount of money leaking out of this government every day. Pardon me, madam? Yeah, that's your name, isn't it? Adam.
We can't have cross-party conversations.
I guess you have trouble defending yourself.
Mr. Mazur, please go ahead. Please go ahead.
So anyways, I asked the other members of this committee. Obviously, the Liberals won't want to step up, but please, Bloc, NDP, as MPs, we have a responsibility to the Canadian taxpayer. And please give this some consideration. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start by reiterating that the Minister of the Environment has appeared at committee 9 times. most recently on May the 22nd, but also on March the 19th, also on December the 14th of 2023. The minister comes here frequently and regularly, and we appreciate his attendance. Mr. Chair, the suggestion from the Conservatives that everything that Canadians are facing right now, from an affordability crisis to a housing crisis, is all a result of pricing pollution, is something that has been soundly refuted by 300 economists across Canada, as well as William Nordhaus, who won a Nobel Prize for his work on carbon pricing. There isn't one reputable Canadian economist or international economist that agrees with their version of reality. So for that reason, Mr. Chair, I would move to adjourn debate on this motion so that we can get back to the work, as the member very rightly pointed out. We have work to do. We have experts here. We have these officials who have come to this committee to answer our questions, and I'd like to get to those questions. So I move to adjourn debate.
A dilatory motion, so we go straight, no debate, we go straight to the vote.
Move to adjourn debate on the motion. Mr. Ali?
Yes.
Mr. Longfield?
Yes.
Ms. Taylor-Roy?
Yes.
Mr. Vancouverden?
Yes.
Mr. Long?
Yes.
Monsieur Dantin?
Nope.
Mr. Cram? Mr. Leslie? Mr. Mazer?
No.
Madame Posey?
Oui.
Ms. Collins?
Yes.
7 yeas, 4 nays.
Okay, so we'll go to Mr. Longfield for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to our 8 witnesses that are here to answer our questions and for your dedication to the work that has to be done in the climate crisis. I want to focus my question around the cap on emissions, something we've been talking about over the last few meetings, both with the bank executives as well as the oil and gas executives. Our emissions, according to the estimates, have dropped since 2005, according to our latest estimates. To your understanding, is the proposed emissions levels in the cap that we're working on consistent with the commitments that we've already made with oil and gas companies? Could you maybe share with us how things are moving along in terms of the emissions cap? Because they are continuing to increase production at a rate that is faster than they're decreasing their emissions density. And the emissions are now 30% of the overall emissions that our economy is facing. So where are we at with all this in terms of our estimates and the work that you're doing as a department to work on capping emissions?
So I can try to answer that question, and I'll start with the context that you referred to, which is that in our most recent national inventory report, we indicated that Canada's total emissions in 2022 were significantly below the highest level pre-pandemic, the 2019 level. So our total emissions are coming down and trending down towards our 2030 target. However, we have one sector that is relatively flat, and that's transportation, hence the need for some more measures in transportation, and only one sector whose emissions continue to actually increase, the oil and gas production sector. And that's the rationale for the government to have made its announcement that it would cap emissions. And so it's in that context that the government has announced a cap. And just to reiterate, the intention is to cap and reduce emissions in a predictable, accountable manner without affecting production decisions. In order to do that, of course, we're engaging with the sector and with provinces to identify what is the maximum technically achievable. So not what will they actually do, but what is actually achievable over a certain period of time. And we'll put in place a cap to ensure that at a minimum that level of emission reductions occurs. We've been engaged in discussions for over a year on this, and I think, as the minister has stated publicly to this committee and in other places, the intention is to provide a draft regulation early this fall.
Provinces, and we always do come across the jurisdictional questions, and provinces being responsible for setting limits on production, product that's coming out of the ground or in the province of jurisdiction. Trying to think of how I can phrase this in terms of our estimates. The work that we're putting into getting the density down faster and to work with the companies involved to not put them out of business with unrealistic targets, but to work with them in terms of the net zero emissions goals that they have and the technology that needs to be employed for them to get to net zero faster. How do you work with ISED or with other departments in terms of the innovations that need to happen faster?
Yeah, so that's a very important question and issue for the Government of Canada. And I'll just start where you started, which is some of the critiques about the cap. I'll reiterate that the intended focus of the measure is on emissions, and so it is our intention, and you will see in the draft regulation that the focus is on constraining emissions and not on dictating where oil and gas gets produced or indeed how it gets produced, so long as the sector is able to reduce emissions over time. As is the case with the government's overall approach to decarbonizing the economy and moving towards net zero, the government's approach to decarbonizing the oil and gas sector involves a suite of measures. At its foundation, of course, is carbon pricing, and then in some cases, there are additional regulatory measures established, primarily either where pricing won't send the right signal or where it won't send the signal adequately because of the trajectory of the sector. But in addition to regulatory measures, for which Environment and Climate Change Canada is the lead, the government deploys, as you mentioned, a number of other measures, including investment tax credits and direct financial contributions from
Merci, Monsieur Moffett.
the Net Zero Accelerator, et cetera.
Merci. Je dois vous arrêter.
Thank you, Mr. Moffat. I must stop you there. You'll have more opportunities to answer the questions. On to Ms. Posey. Thank you for being here today. There's so many of you here as well. I'll start with a question for Ms. Rafoul and Ms. Brady from the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada. When we look at your department plan from 2024-2025, it says work will be done in collaboration with other federal departments in order to reap the benefits of efficiency, especially on programs that have to do with climate change. But we know that the staff from the Impact Assessment Agency was sent off to work with an oil and gas industry program. A central committee has people from ISED, ECCC, who were meant to meet different people from the New Pathways Alliance and other industry actors. So coordination, financial inclusion, taking into account the emissions, and development of projects were all taking into consideration. So there is this committee, the lobbying from a New Pathway Alliance, a bunch of data. All of these elements seem very suspicious to me and are a bit... And it's all what the New Pathways Alliance asked for. It seems as though you did everything that they asked for. Are you going to do everything that the oil and gas industry asks for, including not being subjected to the impact assessment laws.
Je vais essayer de répondre.
I'll try to answer your question. With regards to the projects that fall under the law, they are described in the rules.
So the projects that are subject to the Impact Assessment Act are set out in Governor and Council regulations. That sets out the types of projects, including oil and gas, certain oil and gas projects, and their size that are subject to the law. So it's not a result of lobbying efforts or otherwise that a project would or would not be subject to the Act. There is provision in the Act as well for the minister to use a discretionary authority to subject a project to impact assessment.
Je vous arrêterai justement peut-être sur le contrôle des émissions parce que
I'd like to talk about the controlling emissions. You're going to work with them on taking stock of the emissions and calculating them. However, there's a study from ECCC and another university that demonstrates that emissions from the oil and gas industry are lower than reality in the study, but the study says that they're actually higher than usual. And so why are you sitting at the table with them?
I'm not familiar with that study or the Impact Assessment Agency being involved in it. So,
OK, ben je vais passer à une autre question.
I'll move on to another question then. For the officials from ECCC, a lot of money has been announced for the energy sector. Various industries will be able to find compensation for carbon capture, for example. In compensation, there's a 15% tax credit for companies such as Hydro-Quebec to develop green projects. I think Hydro-Quebec is pretty green already. A lot of money or public funds are going towards the West. The federal government is now getting involved in the management of companies from Quebec. Why? Because it forces them to use the tax credit to reduce the environmental footprint. And now my question. Will Ottawa request and demand from Western oil and gas companies that will they request for them to provide the numbers and say how they will reduce emissions? The tax credit photos are really for my my colleagues in finance, but to respond, the government has developed such a tax credit program to make sure that there is decarbonization and an increase of clean energies. What we did is to make sure that the bill was not did not trickle down to taxpayers. The details on how the tax credit will be implemented with the oil and gas sector are not known for now. But how does that credit work? What are we demanding of the companies in the West, given that we're requesting it from companies in Quebec? I don't have that information right now.
Environment and Climate Change Canada will support Finance Canada in analyzing whatever input is required from companies. But it will be Finance Canada that will stipulate the conditions. And as I think the Minister of Finance is on record saying, they anticipate providing those details this summer.
Yes, thanks again, Madam.
You have 5 seconds. Well, as we say back home, what's good for us is good for everybody else. So if we were to ask Hydro, if we ask Hydro-Quebec to prove that they're worthy of the tax credit, then I think that the oil and gas industry should be just as transparent. It's been noted. On to Ms. Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank the witnesses and experts for coming, the officials. Maybe first, Mr. Tremblay, you mentioned wildfires in your opening remarks. I just noticed that we didn't get a copy of your opening remarks to the committee. Was that, will there...
It was not deliberate. It's Just because I rewrote them, sorry, that happened, that I do that. So
Okay.
I can make sure you got them.
Okay, wonderful. And if in the future, when you're appearing, if you can submit them in both languages before so that the committee can have them, it's helpful in our question asking.
Too long, and I don't want to waste too much of your time, sorry.
Okay. So the first question I have is around wildfires, and we know that last year was just excruciating, record-breaking wildfire season. We are expecting to see from now on to have these kinds of wildfire seasons. Already this year, the hectares burned is getting close to the 20-year average, and we're not even halfway through the year. So I'm curious. New Democrats have been calling for a national wildfire service. We know that the military has been talking about how they don't have enough personnel to respond to the increase in disaster response. Is this something that you and your department has been engaged in conversations about?
Yes, I can point also to Parks on this effort, but on our side, it's what is very important is to provide all the accurate information for all the decision makers. And that's not just the federal government, it's also provinces and local government. Because we do provide meteorological services to all Canadians 24/7. And as you said, the climate is more unpredictable, let's put it that way. And we also see significant shift. I was talking with actually my friends from Parks. At some point, you can have snow in one day and you've got 27 degrees Celsius 3 days after.
And just because we've got a limited amount of time, if we could really focus on wildfires.
What we focus on in our case is building up our capacity to be able to support our friends at public safety in the effort, as well as I mentioned, to make sure that we've got ongoing funding and more funding to support decision makers for the information per se.
Have you had conversations about the idea of a national wildfire service?
I don't personally have necessarily a discussion about what kind of machinery it should look like, but we have discussions about how we are getting more effective at responding to the demands for sure.
And so from what I'm hearing is that there has been no discussions about the creation of a national wildfire or the possibility of that with your department.
I'm not part of discussions on this at this stage, for sure.
Okay, thanks.
But I don't know if Andrew has some information.
So perhaps as the only federal department that has firefighters that are on the ground beside those that are with the Canadian Armed Forces, so that is all run through the Canadian Interagency Fire System. And so within that system, there is all of the interagency groups work together in order to be able to move firefighters across the country today. So we would have firefighters moving.
And I guess the specific question is just around whether or not you've looked at having a national, if there's conversations starting right now, given what we've heard from the military that we don't have enough personnel to respond to natural disasters, that we're going to see summer after summer of increasing wildfire events. If there's been conversations with any of your departments around the creation of a national wildfire service.
So certainly there have been reviews of the functions of CIFC through Natural Resources Canada and the departments that are with that. And there has been an overall look by all of us just in the last year of how can we do better from an interagency department on all hazard analysis. So that's being taken on by public safety.
Thanks so much. Maybe next to Ms. Shannon, I wanted to ask in particular about last year's report from the Environment Commissioner. And, I was pretty shocked that, really they seem to find that the work on Species at Risk Act extremely lacking and from multiple departments. But I remember one thing jumped out for me. For example, Environment and Climate Change Canada had completed only one of the 399 reports that it was required to produce under the Act. The Environment Commissioner had many other criticisms, but I'm curious about the progress since that report came out.
Thank you for the question. So since the report came out, you will recall that we accepted all the recommendations of the Commissioner. The work continues. I don't have details for you in terms of numbers of reports, but I would say that we take the report very seriously, and we have accepted all the recommendations, and will continue to work both internally and with our partner agencies.
Could you follow up in writing with the committee to get us the numbers on how many have been completed? Wonderful. And then, in particular, there's been media around the spotted owl, and wondering if you could give us an update on what's happening with that.
Absolutely. I can, in short, say that work continues in collaboration with British Columbia on the spotted owl. We are engaged currently in discussions with British Columbia and the surrounding First Nations, Spuzum in particular, on what an action plan for the spotted owl might look like.
My next question is on the Impact Assessment Act, and in particular Highway 413.
So, Ms. Collins, we're really out of time.
How long do I have?
Time's up, actually.
Okay, I'll wait for the next round.
Yeah, sure. You'll have another shot for sure. We'll go into our second round, Mr. Mazur.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, officials, for coming out this afternoon. Mr. Trombley, the Liberal government gave away $96 million to General Motors through their Net Zero Accelerator Fund. General Motors is an American company that made over $235 billion in revenue last year. How many emissions are supposed to be reduced directly from this $96 million handout?
Discussion before, I would invite you to invite my colleagues from ISED, who are the ones managing these programs and should be able to answer to the question.
So you are, what's your position again?
I'm the Deputy Minister of Environment, Canada and Climate Change.
Responsible for emissions reductions.
Responsible for emission reductions and for the plans in general, but each department in coordination with us is responsible for the programs they manage, like finance manage GITC, like other departments manage their programs. We're not in a place where one person actually ruled them all.
Okay. So, Mr. Trombley, the Liberal government gave away $300 million to a company by the name of Air Products through their Net Zero Accelerator Fund. Air Products is an American company worth over $80 billion. How many emissions are supposed to be reduced directly from this $300 million handout?
I'd answer the same way.
And you are the Deputy Minister responsible for emission
I'm the
reductions.
responsible. If you look at the Federal Accountability Act that was passed by previous government, the way it works is each Deputy Minister is responsible for the fund engaged within their departments, and that's the way it is and always has been. So if you want to have the answer, you should invite the Minister or the Deputy Minister responsible for the management of this program. I'm just saying that
Point of
they're
order, Mr.
supposed to
Chair.
be the one who should come to answer that question.
Point of order?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sometimes on this committee, the Conservative members treat nonpartisan officials as if they're politicians.
It's not a point of order.
I think it's condescending and rude, and I'd ask that all members respect our
It's not a point of order,
our
but
witnesses.
I think your
Mr. Speaker, I do have a point of order.
words have
Mr.
been
Chair.
noted. Yes,
I do have a point of order.
Ms. Taylor-Roy.
Yeah, just the relevance of the questioning. We're talking about the main estimates here. This program that the member opposite is referring to is not in these estimates. Neither are the officials here responsible for this program. So I'm just wondering if this line of question is actually
Yeah, that's a
relevant.
good point since the program's not.
The
in
officials brought up actually the Net Zero Accelerator, and it's in the minister's mandate letter, and it's talking about emissions reduction. So it's 100% inside of the
Another point of order.
Just on this point, I just want to put in my word that if the officials bring something up, I think it's a fair thing for us to ask about.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. Just
Unless they're bringing something up that's outside the ambit of their mandate. But anyway, go ahead.
just to clarify, if you could, we invited officials from that department to be here today, and they refused, correct?
No, they're coming, but we agreed that we do this. They'd come in the fall.
The deputy minister couldn't come today. I thought that
Pardon?
was I thought the deputy minister couldn't come today, and that's why we couldn't have them here. We've tried, is my point.
Yes, but he couldn't come today, but we've agreed to look at the whole issue of the Net Zero Accelerator in great detail in the fall, rather than only look at it partially today. Anyway, go ahead, Mr. Mazur, but I think you've gotten two answers. Mr. Tremblay has given the same answer twice. I think maybe you might want to move on to another topic.
The deputy minister responsible for emissions reductions doesn't know anything about emissions reductions. Is that true?
Well, I think this is the third time now. I mean, this is becoming a bit badgering of the witness. And I like robust debate at committee, as you know, but I think...
There's more than 80 initiatives under the plans for climate change. There's more than programs than 80 programs. Each program has, I don't know how many projects. You should not expect me coming here on behalf of all those people, not being briefed in advance and having the answer on each project that is funded under each program that exists in the federal government.
Go ahead, Mr. Mazur.
3 minutes?
Yeah, about that.
Mr. Trombley, the Liberal government gave away $551 million to a company by the name of Umicore through the Net Zero Accelerator Fund that you've mentioned, and you're responsible for emissions reduction. Umicore is a Belgian company that made over $27 billion in revenue last year. How many emissions are supposed to be reduced directly from this $551 million handout?
I'm not responsible for emission reductions. Everybody's responsible within the governments for the emission reduction that they're supposed to make through their own programs. We are responsible for coordination and support of other departments in the way they develop their programs. But as I mentioned before, the accountability is still with each department who manage the programs that they have.
Thank you. Chair, I'd like to move the following motion. Given that the Liberal government released its internal economic data on carbon tax, revealing that it costs Canadians $30.5 billion over $1,800 for every household in Canada, this is in addition to the increased cost the carbon tax puts on gas, groceries, and home heating, and the Liberal government has tried to cover up this information for Canadians when the Parliamentary Budget Officer revealed that the Liberal government has had this data. They placed him under a gag order and attempted to ruin his reputation. The committee report to the House and that the Environment Minister must resign immediately. Mr. Chair, Minister Guilbeault needs to resign. Minister Guilbeault has been caught hiding and a damning report from Canadians. Canada's budget watchdog, the Parliamentary Budget Officer, revealed the Liberals were hiding a secret report from Canadians. Not only did we learn that the Liberals were keeping this internal carbon tax report secret from Canadians, we also learned they placed a gag order on Canada's budget watchdog. Yes, the Liberals silenced the Parliamentary Budget Officer with a gag order, preventing him from speaking about damning piece of evidence. We must ask ourselves, why would the government hide their own economic analysis of the carbon tax? Well, we know why.
Just a point of order. Is this
Mr. Longfield.
I'm looking at the motions that we had notice of motions, and this wasn't one of them. So is this a notice of a new motion? And if so, we probably shouldn't be debating it.
It was Thursday?
Yeah, we distributed on the 13th.
Yeah, notice was given on the 13th. Yeah.
So we must ask ourselves, why would the government hide their own economic analysis of the carbon tax? Well, we now know. The government's internal carbon tax analysis revealed the cost of the carbon tax will be more than $30 billion a year. That's almost $2,000 per family. For years, Minister Guilbeault told Canadians that the carbon tax wouldn't cost them. But now we know that Minister Guilbeault willingly chose to vandalize Canada's economy with the carbon tax. He knew the carbon tax was going to harm our economy. He knew the carbon tax was going to cost Canadian families, but he chose to plow ahead with his carbon tax hikes anyways. Minister Guilbeault is an economic vandal. He needs to resign. After 9 years of this Liberal government, Canada is broken. Food is up, gas is up, home heating is up. In the middle of the cost of living crisis, Minister Guilbeault chose to punish Canadians with a carbon tax. The fact that Minister Guilbeault kept his economic analysis secret from Canadians is absurd. How can Minister Guilbeault be trusted? What else is he keeping from Canadians as a secret? In testifying before our committee, Minister Guilbeault was asked if he plans on increasing the carbon tax over $170 a ton past 2030. He refused to rule out further carbon tax hikes. I asked the Environment Minister at committee, and I quote, "Has your government decided whether they will increase the carbon tax over $170 a ton past 2030? Yes or no?" End quote. And the Environment Minister dared to respond with, and I quote, "I'm not obliged to answer yes or no to those questions." End quote. The fact that his carbon tax will cost the Canadian economy over $30 billion per year doesn't bother Minister Guilbeault. The Environment Minister doesn't believe he needs to tell Canadians if he plans to hike the tax on gas, heat, and groceries even further. I encourage all members of the committee to ask Canadians if they have confidence in Minister Guilbeault. Because if they did, they would quickly realize that most Canadians want Mr. Guilbeault to go. And I agree. I represent a completely rural constituency. No minister in this government has inflicted more harm on rural Canada than Minister Guilbeault. Minister Guilbeault has to go, and that is right now. Thank you very much.
Couverton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Over a year ago, the Canadian Climate Institute issued a statement that said that the PBO's latest carbon pricing report had big flaws. It took a little bit over a year for the Parliamentary Budget Officer to re-quantify the economic effects of carbon pricing and issue their statement that there was flaws in their 2022 and 2023 report. So we respect and appreciate the work of the PBO, and we're looking forward to their clarification this fall. I'd like to reiterate the open letter from 300 economists on Canadian carbon pricing has been up on the Ecofiscal website for over 3 months. I wonder if any of the Conservatives have taken the opportunity to read it or to heed some of the very pointed requests and recommendations that the economists make. They basically urge people who are naysaying to come up with an alternative if they are making suggestions that carbon pricing, which is very, very effective at both reducing emissions with our revenue neutral approach, it also supports energy affordability. But Mr. Speaker, what's more concerning than that is that despite the fact that the PBO has arrived at committee to clarify that despite being badgered by Conservative MPs, as we've seen on this committee today, he wanted to re-clarify that he has not been told not to disclose government's carbon pricing analysis. He clarified that in the news, and he clarified that in the committee. And yet the Conservatives are misrepresenting what he said in what he said was his second language and made a mistake. So I would like for the Conservatives to read the new...
Please.
The Conservatives should read the news, and they should accept the fact that the Parliamentary Budget Officer re-clarified that his economic analysis of the impact of the carbon tax was overestimated in his report of 2022 and 2023. That the Canadian Climate Institute basically warned more than a year ago that there were flaws, and despite those flaws, the PBO confirmed that 80% of Canadian households get more money back than they pay in carbon pricing. And I'd remind Canadians who are watching the Environment Committee that on June 14th, many Canadians received their Canada carbon rebate, as I did. If you did your taxes on time but not early, then you would have received April's payment on the 14th. But, Mr. Speaker, like I said, what's more concerning is that the Conservatives continue to not just badger witnesses, but also completely misrepresent.
Yeah, just a second. Yeah. Is it a real point of order?
Is Adam, does he plan on shutting down debate?
Mr. Van Couverden, to you. Thanks.
No, come on. What's the point of order?
Does Mr. Van Couverden intend to shut down debate?
Well, he'll say when he wants to, I guess. Go ahead, Mr. Van Couverden, go.
What report?
You just mentioned about,
Sure, I would absolutely love to table the report from 300 Canadian economists
Okay, order.
on carbon pricing.
So we got, Mr. Vancouver has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As I said, Mr. Giroux, the parliamentary budget officer, re-clarified that after being badgered on committee, speaking in his second language, he made a mistake. And he made an error that he re-clarified on Monday. And yet the Conservatives are using the previous error. They're basically saying that Monday didn't happen. Mr. Speaker, it's unbecoming of any member of Parliament to badger a witness or to misrepresent a public servant. That's unbecoming of any member of Parliament. For that reason, and out of respect for our witnesses, I would ask that we adjourn debate on this frivolous motion.
Okay, we'll go to a vote.
Motion to adjourn debate. Mr. Ali?
Yes.
Mr. Longfield? Yes. Ms. Taylor-Roy? Mr. Vancouverden?
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Long?
Yes.
Monsieur Datel?
No.
Mr. Cram? Opposed. Mr. Leslie?
No.
Mr. Mazer? No. Madame Posey?
Oui.
Ms. Collins?
Yes.
Okay.
7 yeas, 4 nays.
Point of order, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
As requested, I'd like to table the report where the PBO said he is not being muzzled by the Liberal government, despite the fact that Conservative MPs badgered him at committee.
So you want to table his report? What did you?
A news article.
A news article?
Where the PBO reclarifies his position on the economic impact of
Well,
the...
just a
Point of order.
second. I'm suspending for 2 seconds. Okay.
You asked me.
So, Mr.
Just
Vancouver.
Chair?
Yes.
Just point of clarification, what is he actually sending to committee? Is
Well,
it a news article or is it an actual report done by the PBO?
Vancouverden right now. So, Mr. Vancouverden, if you wish to send this article to the committee, we'll have it translated and distributed. Is that what you'd like to do?
I'm happy to. I'm responding to a request from Mr. Leslie. I can send the Canada's Eco-Fiscal Commission's report by 300 economists indicating that carbon pricing is effective and is not contributing to inflation.
You can send what you wish and we'll distribute it.
Okay, thank you very much,
Yeah.
Mr. Chair.
We're basically out of time, unfortunately. And I'm going to suspend the meeting and we'll take a few minutes to go in camera and take the time required to make the adjustments to go into camera. And I want to thank our witnesses for being here and for answering our questions. If we don't see you before the summer break, I wish you all a good summer. I know you'll be busy, but hopefully you'll get some time for a bit of vacation.